Hello everyone and welcome to this video where we are going to be doing a brief overview of the US government, the political system in the USA, going from the Constitution through the different levels and the different branches, just to give kind of a summary of how the system of government works in the USA. The hope is that the information we go through, it's going to give you kind of a overview of the federal system, but also it's going to give you the information that you would need to kind of make an infographic on this. That's what I'm going to be doing today. I've got a blank piece of paper, but to give myself a bit more structure, I'm gonna change it to have a bit of a template to go with. I've kind of filled this in already to give me a bit of structure. I kind of know where I want to put things, but we'll see how we get on. You're going to see my amazing creative skills. They're not really that amazing. They're definitely not amazing. They are not very good, but we've got some little drawings and stuff as we go. So we're going to start in our first box. We're just going to put our title, US Government, a brief overview. We're going to have a couple of images in there. I make my first mistake where I accidentally start coloring in the stripes red and blue rather than red and white, so I need to use some Tipex tape in order to fix that. But we've got a flag, we've got a quick Statue of Liberty, we've got the quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from the Declaration of Independence. And then we move on to the first key element of the US system of government, which is the US Constitution. And really, the whole system of government is built on this document. So it was created in 1787 after the US became independent from Britain, because Britain used to be in charge. It was only after kind of the War of Independence when the USA kind of fought the British and got control over their land. So the Constitution, it's a written or codified constitution compared to kind of the UK and other countries which kind of have uncodified constitutions which aren't written down. They're built on throughout time. But for the USA, it's something that's written down. It's an actual piece of paper, and it separated the levels and branches of government and defined the relationships between the different branches and levels in order to try and balance out power and to kind of have checks and balances on the different parts of the federal system. So we'll see how that plays out in a bit. But really, as I've said, the Constitution, the foundation of the US government. So the kind of notable authors, I mean, lots of people contributed to it, but notable authors include James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. If you are aware of the Hamilton musical, it is that Alexander Hamilton. James Madison's in that too. We can throw in a little quick drawing of a constitution in there. It is a written document that you can go and see. So we have the US Constitution, which we're going to build on in a bit, but before we jump onto what's in the Constitution and the original Constitution and these different levels and branches, it's important to quickly talk about the Bill of Rights, which is a list of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that were made kind of quickly after the Constitution was introduced. So the first 10 are known as the Bill of Rights. In total, I think there have been 27 amendments to the Constitution since it was introduced. I think the last one was in 1992. So just to focus on a couple of them, a couple of these bills. The first one is kind of the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the freedom of religion, freedom of petition, of protest. It includes all of those things to give people the freedom to voice their opinions and to voice if they disagree with those who are making the decisions for them. Number 2 is the right to bear arms, obviously a very controversial one, which originally was put in place to kind of act as a deterrent from the British if they were to invade again. It will allow people to pick up arms and fight them off. And it was inspired actually by English law at the time, but obviously there's questions as to the extent to which that is required now, and should the USA continue to adopt that kind of original thought of the amendment, or whether it does need to be changed. At number 5, we've got the right to a fair trial, the right to have a judge, a jury, to decide your fate. And as part of that, there's kind of the plead the fifth clause where you can, if you're going to incriminate yourself, you can decide to remain silent and you can plead the fifth. So we'll add in a couple of quick pictures there just to go with that. So those are the Bill of Rights. which were additions to the Constitution, which are important to know about. But if we come back to the Constitution, and the important thing first we're going to talk about are the different levels of government that the Constitution outlines. So 3 different levels of government, which are different from branches of government, or at least we're going to make that distinction here. And when we talk about the levels of government, we've got 3. We've got the federal level, or the national level. We've got the state level, and we have got the local level. So federal, state, and local. In the UK, you could kind of make similar sort of picture. We're kind of saying we've got our national government in the UK, and then state level, you could say kind of maybe our devolved governments and devolved assemblies we've got in kind of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. And then we've got local government as well, which kind of in our councils or local authorities. But in America, federal, state, and local. And we're going to spend probably the most time on the federal level, because these are the laws that are made for all of America. So all of America, these laws. So these are laws that are going to affect everyone. And it's going to, how the whole country is run as kind of one body. So we're going to quickly sketch out a map of America. This is freehand. Again, wonderful creative skills here. I'm sure if you're making your own infographic, yours will be much better. With infographics, you want to be adding in as much pictures, lots of colors, underlining things. You'll have noticed I've done a lot of that as we're going. So we've got USA, remember Alaska and Hawaii as well. I think I've kind of looking at it now, I've butchered Florida a bit. It's very small. Sorry about that, Florida. So in looking at this federal level, we need to talk about there being the 3 branches of government. So these 3 branches, they're different from the levels of government. Within the federal level, there are these 3 different branches. So we can draw ourselves a little tree, because trees have branches. Going back to the Constitution, it outlines the kind of balance of power within this federal level between the different branches to stop one branch being more powerful than the others. And we often refer to these as being checks and balances. So just now we're going to give a quick outline of these different branches, but there's lots that you can do to actually look in more detail at how these different branches balance each other out. Maybe something for another video. But if we look at these branches, we have 3, just like the levels, 3 branches. We have the executive, we have the legislative, and we have the judicial or judiciary branch. So can be slightly different names, but here we've got executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Those are our 3. So, to start with the executive is responsible for running the country just like a business. You've got your CEO, your chief executive officer at the top of business. The USA, it's got an executive branch which runs the federal government. So this is led by the president and the vice president. So, currently, of recording this, it's still Donald Trump and Mike Pence are the president and vice president. The expectation is that on the 20th of January, we'll have a handover to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who will be the new president and vice president from 2021 onwards. So we can give ourselves a little picture of Biden. I made the mistake of trying to give him a skin color, which did not work, and now he looks like he is an unfortunate skin condition, so my apologies, Joe Biden. Again, I'm sure your illustration will be much better than mine. So we've got the president and vice president, and the president and vice president, they also put together a cabinet, which is kind of a group of people to help run the country, and they do the most important roles. So it's not just the president and the vice president, they also their cabinets are included in the executive, so lots of positions get filled in. I don't think I write it in now, I think I came back to it later, but an example would be the Bidens outlined that Janet Yellen is going to be the Treasury Secretary, or the Secretary for the Treasury. So these kind of cabinet positions are put in place in these important roles, like the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State as well. So that's the executive. They've got lots of power. Then we come to the legislative, which the founding fathers and the Constitution actually wanted to emphasize as them believing that the legislative are the most important branch of the federal system, and they make the laws for the whole country. So the laws that pertain to everyone in America are made in the legislative at the federal level. So chiefly the legislative is made up of Congress, and Congress is kind of the name that's used and kind of the building used for two separate houses. There's the upper house and lower house. There's the Senate and the House of Representatives. Similarly to, again, looking at the UK, within the Houses of Parliament, there's the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So in America, it's a similar situation with the Senate and House of Representatives, but their makeup is certainly different from in the UK. So, the Senate to focus on first, there are 100 senators, and there are 2 senators for each state. So, 50 states in total. Each state has 2 senators, so that gives you 100 senators in total. Senators, once you're elected, it's a 6-year term. So once you're elected, you have 6 years in office before you can run for re-election again. So you can run to do a second 6-year term. The way it works, though, is that it's 1/3 of the Senate are up for election every 2 years. So it's organized to kind of be a rolling basis so that you're always going to have experienced senators as part of the Senate. Rather than it being every 6 years, everyone's up for grabs. They do it 1/3 every 2 years. So there's always some change in the Senate, always some new people coming in while keeping some experience. And so an example of a senator is Ted Cruz, who is a senator from Texas, really well known. He went up against President Trump for the 2016 Republican nomination, but obviously lost to Trump. But he is a familiar face when it comes to the Republicans in US politics. Then we've got the House of Representatives, which is slightly different. There are many more representatives. There are 435 representatives in total, and they represent districts across the USA. You can see here that I'm quickly running out of space in my box, so I am going to jump into the judicial section just to give our example. So again, if you're making your own infographic, it's going to look much prettier than mine, I'm sure. An important point is that the number of representatives, it depends on the population in the state. So different states have different amounts of representatives. So, for example, California, I think, has 53 representatives out of that 435. 53 compared to Alaska, which I think is only 1. So you see there the difference depending on the population, which means that Alaska actually has more senators than it does representatives, just due to the nature in the Constitution, how it outlines the system of the legislative and the Congress, and the difference between the Senate and House of Representatives. Again, the House of Representatives, it's 2-year terms that they do. So every 2 years, all of their jobs are on the line, and they need to try and win re-election. So the difference for the House of Representatives, the representatives always need to be thinking about their voters and making sure that they are fulfilling their wishes. Whereas the Senate, they've got a bit more time to dig into things in more detail, and they are less beholden to their voters. They've got a bit more time to play with. As an example for the legislative in the House of Representatives, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as she's often known, she's an example of a representative, and she represents the 14th District of New York. So New York has, again, lots of representatives. Finally, our last branch is the judicial branch, and they make sure that the laws passed by Congress and that kind of presidential conduct, any executive orders, anything the president does, make sure that they are valid and that they are constitutional. Essentially acts as a check against the executive and the legislative to ensure that they are fulfilling the wishes of the founding fathers in the Constitution, and that they are following everything they need to make sure that anything that's done at the federal level is above board and is legal and constitutional. It's headed up by the Supreme Court. Often it's the Supreme Court that we think of as kind of really being the judicial branch at this kind of federal level. So headed up by the Supreme Court. There are 9 Supreme Court members. There's one kind of chief justice who kind of oversees and kind of heads up or chairs the Supreme Court, but 9 Supreme Court judges, and they are appointed for life. So they are appointed until they decide to either step down or if they pass away. So our most recent example is Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, and she was replaced by Amy Coney Barrett. She was put forward by Trump, and then she was approved by the Senate just before the most recent presidential or US elections in November 2020. So Amy Coney Barrett, an example there. That is the federal level. A lot to dig into there. Certainly lots to go into the checks and balances between those different levels and how they play off against each other. So that's going to be kind of our biggest level of government. We're going to quickly jump through state and local, just so we've covered that as well, because it is interesting to look at how it's made up at state and local level. So obviously, state level, it's the laws for each state. So each state, whether it's New York, Ohio, Texas, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Oregon, Washington, Utah, Montana, Missouri, Mississippi, Michigan, Wisconsin, all of these states, all 50, they all have their own state government. Their own state level of government. And states also follow the 3 branches of government. So the state has its own executive, has its own legislative, and has its own judiciary or judicial branch. I got a bit confused with what exact language I was using there. So judicial or judiciary branch for state as well. The executive, they run the state, and it's typically headed up by a governor. So a governor who is kind of the chief executive for a state. So our example here, we've got Andrew Cuomo, who is the governor for New York. Heard lots about him in relation to the coronavirus and how he's been handling that, certainly in the early stint, where New York was very heavily affected. Other elected roles are in the executive as well. If you ever hear about the Attorney General, who is involved in kind of the legal proceedings within states, that's an elected position in the executive as well. Lots of others too. If we go to the legislative, each state has its own state legislature, which is normally divided into 2 chambers. Most of them call them the Senate and House of Representatives, just like at the federal level, but different states do give them different names. But they've got a similar process to the federal legislative, but it's just done at state level. And finally, for our kind of judicial branch, different states have their own court systems based on their own state laws. So there are differences between states because the system is built that each state can make up its own laws for a vast majority of cases. So states have that power. Most states have their own Supreme Court as well to act as that kind of court of appeal. And if it can't be resolved at state level, it can then go to the Supreme Court at the federal level. So it can go and bump up levels of government. Finally, at local level, these are laws for local areas. They can be organized into lots of different categories. There's kind of 4 main ones. You can have a county government. You can have government done by town or township. You can have municipal government. You can also have special purpose governments as well, which are kind of like school districts would be an example of that. So when it comes to local government, there's a lot of different ways that things can be done depending on the state, depending on how big the area is, what the laws are. Typically, you'll see in big cities around America, when it comes to local government, the big cities are kind of run by a mayor, or it might be a combination of these different forms of government, but most will have a mayor who will be responsible, acting as kind of an executive for the city in order to run it. So our example here, we've got Eric Garcetti, who is the mayor for Los Angeles in California. So lots of different things with local level, but there we have it. That is our overview. We have got going back, we've got kind of our different levels of government. We've looked at the branches within them. We've looked at how they are based on the Constitution. We've discussed how the Bill of Rights is an addition to the Constitution and guarantees lots of rights for Americans. We've added in some pictures of varying quality. We've added in lots of color. So the hope is that through kind of following this, you've kind of gained a good appreciation for how the US government system works, how it looks as an overall system of government. You can make your own judgments as to whether this sounds like a good system or not, how it compares to the UK system of government, or how things work kind of in a devolved country like Scotland. And hopefully it's given you a good tool. Maybe if you've managed to turn this into a similar infographic like this, I'm sure yours is much better. You can spend lots of time making these as detailed as possible, and they are really, really good resources to come back to just when you're wanting to kind of come back and get that picture of what a concept like the US government looks like, because you can do infographics like these for anything, and they're really good for those who kind of like doing creative things and like displaying information creatively. Right, folks, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for watching. Hope you've learned a bit more about the US government, and for those in my national and higher classes, because I think I'm going to do this for both, as we are back online for this period of online learning, that you've managed to create wonderful infographics, which are even an improvement on my one here. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.